My board replaced me with the CEO's son-in-law after 18 years, so I quietly joined their rival's secret deal and taught them the cost of betrayal. They said it would be a short strategy session, just a check-in, no agenda, no PowerPoint, just a quick sync with the board. After 18 years, I knew how these things worked. Or so I thought. The moment I stepped into the boardroom, something felt off. There was an extra chair at the table, already occupied by a young man I'd seen once or twice at company events, always on the periphery. He looked uncomfortable in his navy suit, but comfortable enough to be here. That's when Warren, the CEO, cleared his throat. "Before we begin," he said, his voice deliberately calm, "there's something we need to announce." I blinked, glancing around the table. No one met my eye. The room was too quiet, too polite. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a strategy session. It was something else entirely. After careful consideration, Warren continued, "The board has decided to move in a different direction." Then, with a kind of cruelty that only comes wrapped in corporate politeness, he turned toward the young man beside him. "This is Kyle," he said. "He'll be stepping in as VP of Strategy, effective immediately." Kyle didn't say a word. He didn't have to. That's when I remembered Kyle was Warren's son-in-law. I sat there for a second, breath caught between shock and restraint. My mind reached for words, but none arrived. What do you say when 18 years are erased with one sentence? So I stood up, straightened my blazer, and left. No tears, no scene, just heels clicking on polished tile, the sound of a life collapsing in silence. Back in my car, I sat with both hands on the steering wheel. I hadn't driven yet. I couldn't. I just stared ahead, heart still beating in that boardroom. Then my phone lit up, an unknown number. I was still sitting in the car, parked at the edge of the lot, when the phone buzzed again. The sky outside was a heavy slate gray, the kind of color that makes silence feel louder. Rain streaked down the windshield in slow, lazy rivulets. I hadn't moved since I left the building. My coat was still on, hands still folded in my lap. The boardroom echoed in my mind, Kyle's smug face, the stunned stillness of my exit, the dull click of the door shutting behind me. And now this vibration cutting through it all. The screen glowed, unknown number. For a few seconds, I just stared at it, not in fear, more like resistance, like I wasn't ready to take in anything else. But then curiosity edged in, it always does. I swiped to answer. "This is Jenna." A pause. Then, "Jenna Monroe. Thank you for picking up. My name is Ethan Grant. I'm the CEO of Corvanta." I blinked. The rain on the windshield blurred the world outside, but my mind sharpened instantly. Corvanta, the name alone stirred something in me. Competition. Precision. We'd crossed paths in bids, deals, and market share, but always from a distance. Now he was calling me. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time," he continued, voice calm and even-toned. "I was just fired," I said, my voice flatter than I expected. Another pause. "Yes," he said, "I know." A chill rippled through me, not from the cold, but from the way he said it, with certainty, with purpose. "I've followed your work for years," he continued. "And I want you to hear this, great people don't vanish just because someone else fails to see them." My fingers tensed slightly on the wheel. "People like you don't go unnoticed. Not by people like me." He paused. I didn't say anything. I was trying to figure out whether this was an insult wrapped in flattery or something else entirely. "I'd like to meet you," he said. "Tomorrow, 10 o'clock, my office." "Why?" I asked, more cautious than curious now. "Because the board that fired you just gave away the best asset they had, and I don't intend to waste that." His voice wasn't just strategic, it was specific, intentional, measured. Before I could reply, a text appeared, his office address, downtown, 27th floor. I looked at it for a long time. 10 works, I finally typed and hit send. Then I just sat. My reflection in the windshield looked like a stranger, not broken, just reconfiguring. What did he want? Really? Why now? I didn't have those answers. Not yet. But I knew one thing for sure: curiosity had replaced the sting. By the time I stepped into Corvanta's boardroom the next morning, my instincts told me the place was sterile but sleek, floor-to-ceiling glass, brushed metal accents, and not a single piece of paper out of place. I half expected the air itself to smell like efficiency. Ethan Grant was already waiting, his tailored navy suit immaculate, his expression unreadable. A man like him didn't waste time on pleasantries. He nodded toward the seat across from him. I sat. No coffee, no handshake, just a folder. It was slim, black leather, and heavier than it looked, like it had something molten inside. "This," he said, sliding it across the table, "is what I want you to lead." I opened it. The first page was a structured acquisition plan, cleanly organized, target firms, timelines, transition frameworks. But halfway down the page, my eyes froze on two bold words: Virion Systems. My throat tightened. I blinked once, then again, as if repetition would change it. My former company, listed under status, in processing. I looked up slowly. "You're acquiring Virion." Ethan didn't blink. "It's in motion, quietly for now." Something between nausea and fire stirred in my chest. "Why wasn't that mentioned yesterday?" "Because I needed you to see the full picture first," he replied, leaning back. "This isn't about vengeance. It's about vision." I closed the folder with a soft thud. "You want me to walk into the company that just replaced me with the CEO's son-in-law and help you buy it out?" "I want you to reclaim it," he said, voice measured. "From the inside. Not as a consultant, not as an advisor," he paused, then added, "as interim CEO." The words hit harder than I expected. I had no response. My mind was running scenarios, each one messier than the last. Did the board know this was coming? Was Kyle a placeholder? Was this Ethan's game? Or was I just another piece in something bigger? "Why me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Because they underestimated you," he said. "And I don't intend to repeat their mistake." It wasn't flattery, it was strategy, and it worked. Still, a thread of suspicion coiled tighter inside me. "And what happens when the acquisition goes through? What happens to me?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood, walked toward the window overlooking the skyline, then turned back. "You rebuild Virion with my backing, full autonomy, full authority. And if you want the title to stay beyond interim, that's on the table." Silence settled between us like a loaded gun. I opened the folder again, slower this time, flipping through the following pages: legal framework, asset migration plans, early termination clauses. One of the documents was already signed by a name I hadn't seen in months: Virion's former legal officer. They'd been preparing this for a while. "You've been planning this since before I was let go," I said quietly. "I have," Ethan admitted. "And the board?" I asked. "They have no idea." He gave a small, tight smile. "They will soon." I closed the folder again, but I didn't push it away this time. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was something worse, curious. Not about the mechanics, but about the endgame, about why I was here. Ethan sat back down. "I won't pressure you," he said. "But timing matters if you want to act. The window is small." I nodded once, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. Something had shifted: power, maybe leverage, or the beginning of something I hadn't yet named. All I knew was this: I wasn't walking back into Virion as a former executive. I might be walking in as their future, and that changed everything. I didn't sleep much after that meeting. Instead, I stayed up cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by old files I thought I'd never open again, my personal backups from Virion's early years. I had copied everything back then, not out of paranoia, but out of principle. That night, I wasn't just revisiting history. I was searching for a weapon. And then I found it: a file labeled Legacy Clauses, M&A Drafts, 2017. The kind of thing most people would have deleted or forgotten about years ago, but not me. I opened it and scrolled past the boilerplate sections, standard employee protections, client contract templates, until one line stopped me cold. Clause 47B, Executive Oversight During Merger Transition, in clean legalese. It read, in the event of an acquisition or internal merger, any member of the originating executive board who held direct governance over IP, compliance, or structural reorg shall be granted transitional oversight for a minimum of 90 business days. That was me, 5 years ago. I had added that clause myself. It was designed to protect institutional knowledge during corporate upheaval, back when I still believed the company would never turn on me. Apparently, no one had ever bothered to remove it, and now it was still binding. I leaned back slowly, a smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. The board had erased my name from the company directory, but legally, I still held the key to their transition. I didn't tell Ethan, not yet. There's a difference between partnership and dependence. I needed to keep this card close for now. Instead, I scheduled a private review with Corvanta's legal team and confirmed that yes, Clause 47B was embedded deep in Virion's acquisition framework, untouched, unchallenged. They hadn't even noticed. By midday, I was back in the glass tower across from Virion headquarters, this time not as an executive, not yet as CEO, but as a shadow preparing the next phase. I began quietly, a lunch meeting with Rina Alvarez, former VP of Product, now consulting from Singapore, a late-night call to Marcus Trent, who'd led infrastructure until they downsized him, a brief coded message to Eleanor, my old compliance lead, who'd once told me, I'd follow your voice in the dark. I wasn't rebuilding Virion. I was repurposing it, not for Ethan, not even for revenge, but for clarity. The more I read the old documents, the more I realized something else. Almost everything still bore my fingerprint: process redesign, me, client retention policy, mine, the emergency transition plan drafted in my apartment on a Sunday with takeout and a deadline. I wasn't starting over. I was walking into a house I'd helped build and watching the new tenants trip over furniture I'd chosen. That afternoon, I received an encrypted packet from Ethan, confidential key personnel analysis, post-acquisition. I opened it slowly, half expecting resistance from Virion's side. Instead, I saw it, a full breakdown of every remaining department head and a flashing red highlight on operations: Kyle Brammer. Kyle, the CEO's son-in-law, my so-called replacement, still holding office, still unaware, but not for long. Because Clause 47B didn't just give me oversight. It gave me veto power over operational reshuffles, over departmental audits, over transition leadership, for 90 business days. You can dismantle a structure or build a new one. I was going to do both. I didn't call anyone that night. I didn't update Ethan. I just sat with it, with the calm, deliberate weight of strategy clicking into place. Sometimes revenge is loud. Sometimes it's the quiet sound of your signature echoing back at you from 5 years in the past. I sat at the corner of the long oak table in the temporary conference room Corvanta had assigned to me, one without windows, sterile and overly lit. Ethan had called it neutral ground. I called it ironic. The air was too still for a war that was still quietly unfolding. Before me lay a thick personnel dossier, stapled, tabbed, and marked confidential. Ethan wanted my recommendations on which members of the Virion leadership team should stay after the acquisition was finalized. You know the battlefield, he'd said, better than anyone else. At first, it felt like a strategy exercise: build the army, choose the captains, remove the weak links. But then the names started staring back. Marcus Trent, I remembered him as the guy who brought folding chairs to the hallway on our first overbooked product summit and called it radical agility. He was a natural leader, someone who didn't chase credit but built structure quietly. Yet in this file, someone had labeled him non-strategic, lacking initiative. Next, Rina Alvarez, the pulse behind our sustainability roadmap. She once worked an entire weekend to debug the supply chain dashboard before launch. Her file said, inflexible under pressure, poor fit for dynamic teams. I frowned. The formatting on the report summaries was suspiciously consistent, all entered within a 2-hour window, all with similar phrasing. I checked the digital signatures: Callie Ningguan, Jared Bell, Rhonda Lively. I felt the breath catch in my throat. 3 people I had mentored back when I still believed loyalty was the currency of leadership. Callie used to leave me handwritten notes with updates when I worked late. Jared brought donuts for the team after a rough sprint. Rhonda once cried in my office after her first layoff meeting. I had hugged her, told her this company still had its soul. Apparently, it didn't anymore. The word bitterness doesn't do justice to what spread across my chest. It was heavier than anger, deeper than sadness. It was the hollow realization that people can smile in your face while sharpening the knife. I opened my laptop and pulled up my private personnel matrix, something I used during executive planning. I added 2 new columns, retain and remove. First, I added the obvious choices, Marcus and Rena, retain. Then I hesitated over Callie. She had messaged me the night I was dismissed. I had no idea. "I'm so sorry, Jenna. You didn't deserve this." But she had known. The timestamp on her internal submission to the board preceded that message by 4 days. The truth always arrives late, but it never lies. I typed her name under remove. Jared followed. Then Rhonda. My fingers moved faster now, like muscle memory had taken over. But bitterness is never clean. It lingers. I thought back to one of our old team dinners, a small tapas place on 6th Street. We laughed that night, talked about building something that mattered. A company that remembers its people, I had said. Callie toasted to it. Was that memory real? Or had I imagined the meaning in it? I scrolled through more names, cross-checking them against performance metrics, meeting transcripts, and quarterly reports I still had copies of. My laptop, like me, remembered what others chose to forget. Halfway down the list, I saw a name I didn't expect, Elna Carter. She'd always been distant, calculated, some said cold, but I had a different read. She was deliberate, cautious, and her notes on the merger were clean, data-driven, and shockingly fair. I marked her retain. There was a knock on the door. It was Ivy, one of Ethan's aides. "Need anything?" she asked. I looked up. "No, just clarity." When she left, I stared at the final page, 43 names. I drew 2 lines with my pen, one down the left side, keep, one down the right, let go. It felt clinical, almost surgical, but that's what this was now, a precise dissection of a rotting structure, preserving only what still pulsed with life. I saved the file as personnel_transition_matrix_v1_jh.pdf and, as I hit send, something inside me clicked into place. Not rage, not sadness, something colder, something necessary. It wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. I didn't need a badge to walk through the revolving doors of Virion Systems. The building hadn't changed, same chrome trim, same digital directory flickering at the front desk. The woman at reception didn't recognize me, not really. To her, I was Miss Hall, external counsel, here to meet with legal, technically true, legally surgical. A part of me wanted to pause, to stand still right there in the lobby and drink it all in, the irony, the tension, the quiet satisfaction of returning on terms that belonged entirely to me. But that moment of indulgence passed as quickly as it came. I had work to do upstairs. The executive suite was unusually quiet. The legal conference room was sealed with opaque sliding glass. Inside were 2 attorneys from Corvanta, one from Virion, and a compliance officer with a stack of NDAs thicker than my old annual reports. They looked up when I entered. Jenna, one of the Corvanta leads, nodded. "Thanks for coming in." "I'm not here for coffee," I replied coolly. "Let's begin." The meeting was dense with detail, non-compete clauses, retention bonuses, severance thresholds, buried amendments that dated back to when I'd helped rewrite the operations charter in 2018. I knew every inch of that structure because I built it. Now I was the one disassembling it piece by piece, methodically, clinically. When they broke for lunch, I declined the catered wraps and stepped into the hall. I needed air. Walking the corridor felt like tracing the ghost of a life I no longer lived. I passed the product strategy wing, the place where I used to host Friday debriefs. One time, our entire design team had gotten locked inside during a fire drill and ended up sketching out the first full beta concept for the eco-infrastructure tracker on a whiteboard. We laughed about it for months. Now the whiteboards were wiped clean. The soul of the place had been bleached out. At the corner near the break room, I paused. Kyle stood by the coffee machine, aggressively pumping the spout like it owed him something. His blazer was too crisp, his smile too forced as he awkwardly bantered with a junior analyst I didn't recognize. He dropped a stir stick, missed the trash can, and didn't bother to pick it up. I didn't stop walking. He didn't notice me. That was the beauty of invisibility when worn by choice. I turned down the west corridor, making my way toward the elevator when I saw him, Warren. He was standing near the glass balcony, talking with someone over the phone. His back was turned at first, but as I walked past, he ended the call, pivoted, and saw me for half a second. Neither of us moved. His expression was unreadable, no recognition, no confusion, just a tilt of the head, the kind old-school executives use when they know something is shifting but can't quite see the shape yet. I gave him a simple nod, the same one he once gave me after I presented our 5-year roadmap, the nod that meant understood. Then I turned and entered the elevator. There was no music, just the software of motion and the hum of my thoughts, sharpening. That afternoon, back in the legal room, I outlined a phased integration plan. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, merging the company that once erased me into a new empire where my signature would finalize the transformation. They still didn't know I was slated to become interim CEO post-acquisition. That was the deal Ethan and I had sealed in a quiet conference room 3 nights prior. He said I had unfinished business. He was right. But I wasn't here for revenge, not directly. I was here to recalibrate, to redirect, to redefine the very rules they once used against me. When the meeting wrapped, one of the Corvanta execs clapped me on the shoulder. "You make this look easy." I offered a thin smile. It's only easy when it's personal. That night, I didn't celebrate. I didn't even pour a drink. I sat by my window, watching the city lights flicker across the skyline and let the silence remind me of what I hadn't said yet. Because power isn't always loud. Sometimes it walks right past you. Sometimes it wears no badge. And sometimes it smiles quietly. I wasn't expecting much that morning. My calendar showed a quiet block of strategy prep with Ethan's transition team, and my coffee hadn't even cooled by the time the first ping landed in my inbox. It was an internal memo thread. Subject: Client Escalation, Everglass, Verericon, NorthTech, 3 of our biggest legacy clients. I frowned. This wasn't meant for me. A junior analyst named Oliver had CC'd me by mistake, probably muscle memory from the old days when my name was still on the leadership distribution list. Poor kid. But my finger paused above the delete key. Then I read the first few lines. Kyle believes we're ready to push forward with the consolidation pricing model. Unfortunately, it appears Verericon has already initiated withdrawal paperwork. Another line down, Everglass requested a formal audit of our delivery timelines. They're unhappy with the project lead handoff. And finally, NorthTech is pausing all renewals pending further discussions. They want to speak with someone, not Kyle. I sat still, my hand slowly lowering the mug. A weightless kind of silence filled the air, not anger, not vengeance, just calm clarity. The strategy Kyle had insisted on, aggressively rewriting long-standing client agreements, fast-tracking deliverables without back-end support, slashing legacy team involvement, was imploding, and now the fallout was landing squarely in his lap. At the bottom of the chain, Oliver had written, looping in comms for damage control. Should we involve PR if this leaks? I should have deleted the thread. I didn't. Instead, I slid the laptop a few inches away and leaned back, processing the moment, not as someone who'd been humiliated, but as someone quietly watching the scales shift. When I met with Ethan later that afternoon, I didn't mention the email. I didn't need to. He glanced at the screen of his phone mid-conversation, raised one brow, then looked at me. "Looks like we won't need to wait much longer," he said simply. I didn't ask what he meant. He didn't offer details, but we both knew. For weeks I'd walked carefully through hallways I once ruled, sat in meetings where I kept my voice low and my gaze lower, all while watching Kyle pretend to fill shoes 3 sizes too large. But this email, was the first visible crack. And it hadn't come from sabotage, it had come from their own hand. And it was only the beginning. Later that night, I found myself in a quiet hotel lounge downtown, laptop open, sipping something bitter and sharp. I reread the thread, this time more slowly, the dates, the language, the desperate tone beneath the jargon. They were circling the drain. 3 clients. 3. Those had been the ones who stayed with us through the 2018 downturn, the ones I'd flown cross-country to meet during Christmas snowstorms, the ones who'd emailed me directly when their systems glitched, trusting me to fix it fast. They weren't just accounts, they were trust embodied. And Kyle had tossed them into chaos. In less than 6 weeks, I began sketching out contingency frameworks, not from ego, but from necessity. Ethan's interest wasn't just about replacing a crumbling rival. He wanted someone who understood the roots, the wiring, the pulse, and in the eyes of those clients, I never left. A soft ding interrupted my thoughts, a second email from Oliver. Subject, apologies, sent in error. I almost smiled. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a new tab and pulled up our original client retention documentation. My name was still listed in half the operational clauses. The irony didn't escape me. They had tried to erase me, but systems remember. People remember. And sometimes emails do too. The morning the NDA expired, I woke up before my alarm. I didn't need the chime to remind me what day it was. My breath was steady. My mind was sharper than it had been in months. I had worn silence like armor, but now the rules had shifted. At 8:01 a.m., the internal announcement went out. Subject line, leadership update, effective immediately. It was only 3 lines long. No introduction, no ceremony, just the facts. Effective today, Jenna Carr has been appointed interim CEO of Virion Systems. This decision is backed unanimously by the board. All department heads are to report directly to her. Effective immediately. I read it twice, not because I didn't believe it, but because I wanted to feel every syllable press into my skin. A quiet tremor moved through the building. Somewhere near the break room, I heard someone drop their coffee. My first steps back onto the executive floor were met with a strange kind of hush, not fear, not celebration, more like an inhale that hadn't been released yet. The same hallway where I once walked invisible now pulsed with the weight of retribution, unspoken. Amanda from legal gave me a nod, slow and deliberate. Not everyone had betrayed me. Some had simply stayed silent, and some silences spoke volumes. Kyle wasn't at his desk. I later learned he had locked himself in the executive conference room since the announcement hit inboxes. He hadn't spoken a word, not even to Warren. I passed my old office, now once again mine. The door still had the nameplate Kyle H. Maddox, Chief Strategy Officer. I paused, then pushed it open without knocking. Empty. The space hadn't changed, same layout, same desk, but the energy was different. They had removed my photos, my books, my old leather chair, but the faint shadow of them remained. You don't erase presence that easily. My assistant, Rebecca, stood just outside with a fresh printout of the new org chart. We've updated your calendar. Legal and ops at 9. Media requests are already coming in. I took the folder. My hands didn't shake. By 10 o'clock, I was in a closed-door session with the board. No pleasantries, no apologies. They spoke to me like I had never left. And I chose not to remind them of their silence months earlier. Power doesn't beg to be acknowledged. It enters the room and watches who blinks first. Ethan sent me a message, just 5 words, it begins now. Proud of you. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. At 3:30 p.m., I stood in front of the operations whiteboard. Kyle's quarterly forecast chart still lingered in dry erase scrawl. I uncapped a marker, erased the entire thing in one clean sweep, and wrote one word in bold block letters, stabilize. Because collapse wasn't the story I came to tell. Resurrection was. That night, I stayed late, lights off, only my desk lamp glowing against the dusk. Maintenance came by. One of the janitors, an older man I'd spoken with during late project nights, paused at the door. He gave me a small nod and said, "Nice to have you back, Mrs. Carr." And it hit me. This wasn't revenge. This was restoration, not loud, not petty. Just quietly, absolutely just. I leaned back in the chair, my chair now, and opened the master strategy document for Virion Systems. I didn't look at what Kyle had written. I didn't need to. I started fresh, line by line. I rewrote our future, not as the woman who had been erased, but as the leader no one would ever overlook again. I knew walking back into those glass-walled conference rooms wouldn't be easy. But I also knew I couldn't lead without first listening. One by one, I called in the very people who once looked through me. The first was Stephen, head of vendor accounts, who had shared coffee and jokes with me for years, then disappeared the day Kyle took over. He stepped into the room stiffly, clutching a folder like a shield. "I want to be honest," he said before I could speak. "I didn't defend you. I didn't say anything. I didn't know how to." His voice trembled, not from fear, but shame. I nodded slowly. "And now?" He looked down. "Now I understand silence is also a choice." There was no performance in his apology, just an ache that mirrored my own. I let him stay. Then came Lena, formerly in charge of logistics. She greeted me with a forced smile, like we were old friends. But I remembered how she'd submitted glowing evaluations of Kyle just days before I was removed. "I hope there are no hard feelings," she said, attempting levity. "Corporate shifts are messy." I didn't flinch. "So are loyalties." Lena's eyes narrowed slightly, but she said nothing more. She wouldn't be staying. By the time I'd reached the 10th meeting, I could feel the weight of the past pressing in. Some cried softly. Some defended their inaction. Some confessed they had simply been afraid of losing status, afraid of Kyle, afraid of being next. But none of them prepared me for Maria. She walked in holding a notebook to her chest, her eyes already glistening. Maria had been my assistant for 4 years. She was the one who used to organize my flights, filter my inbox, bring me ginger tea when she knew I hadn't eaten all day. She never said much, but she always noticed everything. She closed the door behind her and stood, hands trembling. "I don't expect anything," she said quietly. "I just need you to hear me." I gestured for her to sit, but she shook her head. "When Kyle came in," she began, "they asked me to start reporting on your activity, every meeting you had, every file you opened, even your moods." My breath caught. They said it was standard, that the board needed transitional oversight. I didn't know what to believe at first, but then the reports were twisted, taken out of context. That day, Maria didn't just regain a job. She reclaimed her voice. And I, after 18 years of being spoken over, finally felt heard. Outside the interview room, the office buzzed with whispers. The news had spread, Jenna was back, but not just as a CEO, as someone who remembered every closed door and opened new ones anyway. The tension in the room was thick enough to slice with a paperclip. Kyle wasn't on my calendar, but there he was, leaning against the doorframe of my office like it still belonged to him. He gave me that same easy smirk he always used when he thought charm could outweigh truth. But this wasn't the old Jenna he used to manipulate through corridors and closed-door meetings. This was the Jenna who had been burned, rebuilt, and returned with steel in her veins. "Can we talk?" he asked. I gestured toward the chair, but I remained standing. I wanted the imbalance to be felt. He launched into it almost immediately, soft words wrapped around hard motives. He suggested collaboration, said the company needed stability during the transition, that he knew the clients, the board, the systems, that I was smart enough to know power didn't have to be personal. I said nothing. I just opened the top drawer of my desk. From it, I pulled a sealed envelope, white, heavy, final. I slid it across the desk slowly, deliberately. He didn't touch it at first, just stared, then scoffed. "You're making a mistake," he muttered. I remained silent. He opened it, read the first few lines. His lips parted slightly, no longer smirking, just stunned. The letter was short, but it said everything. Effective immediately, Kyle Weston was no longer employed at Virion Systems. No negotiation, no debate, just closure. He looked up, searching my face for something: anger, pettiness, regret. But all I gave him was the same silence he'd once given me when he took my job. "You don't have to do this," he whispered. I can help you. I nodded slowly. You already have, by showing me who you really are. Kyle stood, the envelope still in his hand. He didn't slam the door. He didn't argue. He just walked out, for the first time unsure of his place in the world. I watched from the window as he crossed the parking lot. He didn't look back, and I didn't expect him to. Back in the office, Maria stepped in. Everything all right? She asked. I smiled faintly. Everything's just beginning. She paused, then stepped out quietly, sensing the gravity still lingering in the air. I sat down at the edge of my desk, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The last 10 minutes had felt like a decade compressed into a single breathless exchange. The control I had trained myself to hold, tight, steady, impenetrable, had carried me through. But my knuckles were still white from gripping the edge of the desk. A soft ping landed on my laptop, an internal message from Ethan. Is the weight finally off your shoulders? I typed only 2 words, he's gone. There was no celebration, not yet. Just that heavy, soundless exhale that comes after a battle fought with restraint instead of weapons. As I stood again and paced toward the wall of framed strategy maps, I thought back to the boardroom 2 years ago, the one where I was asked to train Kyle into leadership. The room had applauded his charm. I had taken notes. A second ping, next phase begins tomorrow. Legal's ready. HR's aligned. I trust you know who's staying. I did. And for the first time in a long while, I wasn't guessing. I turned the lights off, letting the evening wrap around my shoulders like armor. As I walked through the hallway, the shadows of past decisions echoed faintly beneath the humming fluorescence. This wasn't revenge. It was recalibration. And I wasn't done yet. I stepped into the boardroom as if I had never left. But everything had changed. I took my place at the head of the room. There was no microphone, no dramatic lighting, no video montage of my achievements, just me. A simple agenda slide on the monitor behind me, and the quiet presence of everyone who had once seen me fall. Thank you for coming, I said softly, my voice filling the space with more weight than volume. People settled, chairs creaked, the whispering stopped. I won't keep you long, I began. And I won't make this about the past. Someone in the back leaned forward slightly. Another crossed their arms. I smiled inwardly, I had their full attention now. I've always believed that the loudest one in the room isn't always the one in charge. True leadership doesn't need volume. It needs vision. It needs clarity. And it needs patience. I let that hang in the air. For nearly 2 decades, I stood at this table, often unheard, sometimes unseen, but never unprepared. I watched decisions get made by those who forgot who built the models, who reviewed the contracts, who caught the risks before they became failures. A flicker of recognition passed through a few faces. Maria sat in the front row, her eyes fixed on mine, her posture rigid. She'd seen everything unfold. She had been a silent witness when the board replaced me with someone louder but less capable, someone with a convenient last name and a borrowed resume. But here's the thing about value, I continued. It doesn't vanish just because you stop acknowledging it. It doesn't fade just because someone else is louder. Real value waits. And when the noise dies down, when things begin to crack, it's the quiet that rises. There was a shift in the room, a weight settling in. I won't call out names, I said. I don't need to. People knew, especially those who had helped Kyle stage his silent coup, then watched in horror as client after client walked out the door under his chaotic leadership. I didn't need to list their missteps. The financial reports spoke for themselves. This isn't about punishment. It's about recalibration, re-entering on what made this company great before it forgot who held it together. Warren was seated 2 rows from the front. He didn't flinch, didn't blink, but he didn't look away either. We both remembered the day he had read the scripted dismissal with 0 eye contact. I've met with nearly every team these past few weeks, I continued. And I've seen something remarkable, not fear, not bitterness, but quiet endurance. The kind that keeps working even when no one's watching. That's the kind of strength I believe in, and that's what we will rebuild on. I paused, then took a breath. From this moment forward, we moved differently. We listen deeper. We lead better, not because we have something to prove, but because we already did, and we're still standing. It wasn't a rousing speech. There was no fiery crescendo, no crowd-pumping finale, just truth delivered with the calm of someone who had walked through fire and learned how to hold her ground in the ashes. Silence stretched again. Then someone stood. It was Derek, the same VP who once said in a meeting that I was better behind the scenes. His face was unreadable, but his body language spoke volumes. Then Maria rose, then another, and another. A standing ovation, not explosive, not frenzied, but deliberate, measured, respectful. I didn't smile. I didn't bow. I just stood still, accepting the gesture, not as a reward, but as a recognition of something long overdue. As I stepped down from the platform, I passed Warren. Our eyes met for a brief second. He gave the slightest nod, one of acknowledgement, not apology. Outside the boardroom, the air felt clearer. The morning sun hit the glass lobby just right, throwing fractured gold across the floor. It wasn't victory I felt, not exactly. It was something quieter, deeper. It was peace earned and held with both hands. And I walked away from that room not needing anyone to clap louder, because this time they finally heard me. The carpet in that boardroom hadn't changed, same subtle pattern, same faint scent of polished wood and politics. As I stepped through the door, the very door that once marked the abrupt end of my 18-year career, I didn't feel anger, no tremor in my fingers, no weight in my chest, only a calm so deep it almost felt like silence inside me. The board members sat at the long mahogany table, murmuring to each other in clipped tones. Some glanced up, a few gave me hesitant nods. Warren was at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. I didn't sit. Instead, I reached into my leather portfolio and took out a small black voice recorder. A few brows furrowed. "I'd like to begin," I said quietly, placing the recorder in the center of the table. "There's something you should all hear." I pressed play. The room filled with the sound of Warren's voice, recorded in that very room on the day they removed me. It was a sharp contrast to the hushed atmosphere now. "Now, we've decided to take the company in a new direction, effective immediately. Kyle will be assuming your role." My own breath had caught back then. I remembered the pounding silence afterward, the ache in my throat as I nodded and walked out without a word. But now, watching their faces as the recording played, I felt none of that, only clarity. The recording ended. I let the quiet sit. Then I looked directly at Warren. "You chose family," I said, voice steady. "They chose true value." His lips parted slightly, perhaps to defend himself, perhaps to reach for the right words. But none came. He nodded once, stiffly, and lowered his gaze. I turned to the rest of the room. Some shifted uncomfortably, others didn't dare move. "In case it's not clear," I continued, "Corvanta finalized the acquisition this morning. Virion Systems is no longer under your leadership, and as of today, I step in, not to prove anything, but to build something better with integrity and memory." I paused, then added, "This isn't a victory speech. There's no applause expected, just alignment." No one spoke. I gathered my things, turned back toward the door. As I placed my hand on the knob, I looked over my shoulder one last time. The room remained frozen, and then, softly, purposefully, I closed the door behind me. No slamming, no drama, just finality. It would not open again. Outside the boardroom, sunlight streamed through the atrium skylight. It hit the marble floor in golden slants. And for a moment, everything felt suspended. Still, I stood there, letting that warmth settle on my skin, not the warmth of revenge, but of reclamation. My assistant, Lauren, waited nearby, holding the press release in hand. "They're ready whenever you are," she said. I nodded. I had meetings lined up, plans to activate, new voices to elevate, and yes, wounds to tend to, but that would come in time. First came culture, then structure, then growth. As I walked past the receptionist desk, the same one I'd passed 1,000 times before, Maria looked up. Her eyes were glassy again. She gave a small, knowing nod, and I nodded back. Upstairs in the office that once overlooked my whole career, I stood for a moment at the glass wall. This time I wasn't looking at what I had lost. I was seeing everything I had rebuilt, with patience, with grit, with strategy disguised as silence. I pulled out my phone. A new message had arrived from Ethan: "Welcome home." I smiled. For 18 years, I had given Virion my mind, my hours, my heart. They had tried to erase me in a single meeting. But what they didn't realize was that you can't erase legacy when it's built on foundation, not favor. You can't fire value. You can only delay its return. And now I was back, not with noise, but with presence. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself. The kind that speaks even in silence. The kind that closes doors so others finally see what was behind them all along. Looking back, this wasn't just a story about being fired and returning with a title. It was about something much deeper, the quiet power of staying true to yourself even when others try to silence your worth. I learned that you don't need to shout to be heard. Sometimes all it takes is patience, clarity, and the courage to close the right doors at the right time. Betrayal hurts, but it can also sharpen you, remind you who you are, and push you to rebuild something far stronger than what was lost.